So my name is Tommy Palm. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Resolution Games. And my talk here today is why VR mustn't mimic mobile. So I want to start here. I'm an engineer and I've always been fascinated with human development. And this is a graph of milestones that go back to the invention of language. We're not quite sure when that was. It was some 100 to 50,000 years ago. And that accelerated human development quite a lot because we could communicate to each other and collaborate in a whole different way than we could before. One of the reasons we don't know exactly when is that there is no written evidence, of course, from that time, because writing didn't come until some 5,000 years ago. And that also progressed things quite a lot because we could save things from generation to generation. Then way over here in 1440, another entrepreneur, Gutenberg, refined the printing press and started mass-producing books. That all of a sudden made it possible for much more people to get access to information. Not only the elite could now read up on things and learn more. Then fairly recently, internet came along and started opening up information freely to everybody and made it much more easier to publish knowledge to a broader audience. Then just some 10 years ago, smartphones started to become popular and let us have that information on the top of our fingers and get it very accessible. And now we are seeing VR and AR changing everything again. And it will get this information to you instantly wherever you need it. And this is going to be a huge impact on how fast we can learn things and spread information. One great way of impacting the world today is by being an entrepreneur. And one of my favorite entrepreneurs is Steve Jobs. And his work influenced me a lot. And one of my favorite quotes is this, where he says, "Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people no smarter than you. You can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use. And once you realize that, you'll never be the same." So if VR and AR is this fantastic new revolutionary technology, why games? Well, I think that's a valid question, but games have been really great at spearfronting new technologies and been on the bleeding edge of technology advances. And I think the same thing goes with VR and AR, obviously. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is from a game that I was part of making some 6 or 8 years ago. And it's an illustration of a French resistance movement during the World War II. It's a small team of experts working together for this common goal. And it's also the game development team behind the game. So I'm up on the left. And this is how I see a really great games team functioning together. Small teams of experts in different fields that come together for a bigger goal. And I've seen an enormous amount of efficiency in this small group that is struggling on a problem in a new platform, for instance. And this also emphasizes the communication between people, how important it is to have a mutual vision. And that's one of the more difficult things with game development, I think. I grew up during the 80s, and that was a fantastic time to grow up if you liked games. This is from the poster of Tron with Jeff Bridges as the main character who travels into the world of computers. And that's kind of how I envisioned the future. Me and my semi-nerdy friends who were first playing games and then later on started developing for Commodore 64 as a hobby. And we kind of felt that if games were already this great, just imagine what it would be like in a couple of years from now. And that was such a big motivation. I had the opportunity to try VR very early on in the early 90s as one of the VR arcade machines come to Sweden. And I was blown away. I thought that was super cool, and I thought this was obviously going to be where games were going next. It added another dimension to actually be inside of this computer-generated world. But it has taken quite some time, and now, last year, we were seeing the first commercial available hardware that started this revolution for consumers. I studied later on the Royal Institute of Sweden, and I had this aha moment there when one of my close friends came up and showed his new mobile phone. It was a Nokia 6110, and he had a multiplayer version of Snake on it. And we played that a lot during the breaks. And I felt that, wow, this is going to revolutionize everything. Very soon, people were walking around with a capable game console in their pocket. So I went home to my parents and I told them, I'm going to have to quit school because I'm going to get rich making making mobile games. And they were a bit skeptical, but at least I got started very early on in the late 90s. I had no clue that it would take a really long time until it was commercially viable to make games for mobile phones and actually get your money back. And I started somewhere in the beginning, and it wasn't until iPhone came along when everything changed in 2008, when it was actually possible to make money back from end consumers. It was two big obstacles during those days. One was fragmentation of many devices that you ended up spending a lot of your energy porting the games. And the other one was just the distribution was very difficult with many carriers that you needed to agree with and make contracts with. Later on, I was fortunate enough to be part of the process of making Candy Crush Saga that turned into become one of the biggest games in the world. And it was a fantastic experience. I sold my previous company to King, and we started working on Candy Crush as the first game. Here's a picture of me talking to TV in Taiwan about it, and Taiwan was one of those countries that went completely nuts over Candy Crush, and about 10% of the population played it every day. And I had this dream for a really long time that one of the games that I would work on, I would see somebody randomly playing that game, and that happened in Taiwan for the first time. That already on the plane, people were playing it like crazy. It was super fun. So this is about VR, but I think that some of the things that I learned working for 15 years with mobile phones, I bring with me over to VR, and they can be summarized in these three things. One is accessibility. I definitely feel that games can be for everyone if we make sure that they are not only about shooting people and blowing things up and making it intuitive to start playing them. And free-to-play has been also a thing that has opened up the target group much more, because people like to try before they know that they want to invest their time and money into something. The other thing is social games. You know, as humans, we're social creatures, and we want to have fun experience together with other people. So I think that's a core part of opening up the target group as well, making sure that your games can be enjoyed not only at home alone in the basement, but together with your friends and family. And the last one here is games as a service, looking constantly at your games, not just developing something and letting it go, but seeing how players interact with your game is crucial to make big, successful IPs these days. But VR is a very different platform in many other aspects, and I'll go into that more here. So one of the core things with VR is to trick your senses. And as humans, we have 5 senses that we use to discover the world: the vision, taste, smell, hearing, and touch. And when it comes to vision and hearing, we're quite far along already at being able to trick the brain that it's somewhere else. And the other ones are not that far along. People are working a lot on touch and making it more and more intuitive to use your hands. But we're far away from being able to reach out to something and feel the texture of a virtual item. And that's one of the things you see. This is a picture I took at E3, and I like it a lot because it shows something that we see a lot. So somebody testing VR for the first time, you typically see these two things. This wow moment when their mouth opens up and they see the potential of this new media. And then secondarily, they try to touch things. And as they can't and sees that interaction with VR is still very bulky, the output is great. You know, they see that they are somewhere else, but it's hard to interact in an intuitive way in it. So this is one of the things that we as content developers need to overcome. This first thing, people love VR, but the second time they come back, they need something that keeps their interest going. One of the things that I learned as a game designer is very tricky with VR is this cyber sickness, and it's much more to it than you initially think. We tend to see that people who get nauseous once, this is a very profound thing. Once you get nauseous, you don't want to do it again. And that makes it for you as a developer, you need to make sure that performance is there and that you are not moving around people too much. And that's especially important for this first time when they try virtual reality, of course. There is a method of letting people move around in VR without making them nauseous. One is using third person for moving around. So you see the game character moving in the world instead of moving the camera. But unfortunately, it removes a lot of this immersion that you get from being yourself and looking around with your head. There's also teleportation, but it's really bulky and removes this very intuitive environment that it is otherwise. The different platform holders, they know that this is a big problem. This first, the quality of VR apps is really important. If you experience something that is bad, you don't want to come back. But they spend a lot of time trying to teach developers and making sure that people are not submitting content that is not good enough. And that's a job they have to do, but it's also a big barrier. And this is one of the things that mobile apps were really great at, allowing a lot of influx of new experimental games. And we need to come to a stage in VR where users can add content very smoothly to existing engines, so that we get much more worlds, because it's very expensive to build this content, of course. So right now my company is Resolution Games. It's a Swedish company. We're about 25 developers right now. We jokingly call it, we have the ABC of games, because we have key people from Angry Birds, Battlefield, and Candy Crush in the team. We now have 2 teams, and we try to be very agile and do a lot of experimentation and prototyping before going into production. One of the first games we released is Bait, which is a fishing adventure game. We released it in Q1 2016 for Samsung Gear. And this game has more than 2 million downloads, which in mobile is nothing, but in VR it's one of the biggest numbers I've heard of. We have also released it for Daydream now, and it was an 8-person team behind this, and it took us about 8 months from idea to releasing the game. Worked a little bit on it since, updating it with more content. It has been a really great experience for us as a development team to get this out in the market fairly early and learn a lot. One of the things that we learned from making Bait is it was very hard with a new team that hadn't worked with VR before to spend all these 8 months on one game. So with our second game, Wonderglade, we divided it up into smaller mini games instead. So the team could learn quicker and release games much faster. And we wanted to, this is a Daydream title, and wanted to make something that would be a great door opener for people who just bought the headset and wanted to show their friends and family what VR can be about. So we have a lot of different mini games like mini golf and racing, where you just use the controller intuitively to compete with your friends. And it's one of the highest rated games on the Daydream store, so we felt that it's been successful project. Both of these titles have been free to play, something that I'm passionate about, and I think it's a great way of lowering barrier to entry and trying it out. So back to this core talk, and why isn't it that VR must mimic mobile? Well, first of all, as I've been talking about, these are two very different platforms. There are some similarities between them, but where in mobile you have your life ongoing and you want to be able to take it up and play a little bit and put it back down, VR is much more about taking the time and going away into a different world, and you have much more activation energy, as we refer to it, because it's a little bit cumbersome still to put this headset on. So once you do that, you want to spend some more time in it. And we are doing quite a lot of data gathering. This is a graph showing daily active users from Bait. And one of the things that we see here clearly is that VR is very much appointment gaming at this point. And what I mean with that is that it's competing on the same time as consoles or movies. So you typically play in evenings or weekends. And that's what you see in this cyclic curve. As developer, nobody really needs VR at this point. So we have a responsibility to make sure that VR equipment doesn't end up here. This is my closet door, and it hides my karate equipment that I very rarely use, and also my room scale hardware that's no longer in my living room where it was originally. And we need to make sure that people feel that they are getting proper value out of their VR experience. For me personally, one of the things is that games are very, very hard to make. Our industry is extremely hit-driven, and one of the reasons behind that is that it's extremely difficult to innovate and find new things. I think that a lot of the game design is about understanding how the brain works, and as humans, we haven't figured that out yet. The brain is a very, very complex thing, and there is a catch-22 that says if the brain was easy enough so we would understand it, we wouldn't have the brain power to actually understand it. I drew this Venn diagram on the board like the first week when we started Resolution Games, and I said, I think this is kind of the complexity of the problem that we're approaching, where games is the harder things. There's a VR and AR have things that are same problem space, but the more complex thing is just to make an intuitive game that people understand and can get into. Finally, I want to just remind people, I think that even though we have great hardware in the market now, we are still very, very early days in VR. And we're probably around here if you compare it to mobile phone games. So I hope to see that this development goes very quickly, and I'm sure that in just 5 years we'll have people working in VR much more efficiently than they would if they worked on a two-dimensional screen. So finally, I'm sure VR is coming, whether we want it or not, and I think the result will accelerate human development, which is a great thing. As content creators, we can influence the adoption speed of this. So if we make sure that we don't make content that sucks, people will want to come back more often and experience this. And this is an amazing new technology that we discovered. I'm sure that I'll be at a Casual Connect here later on when somebody will be demonstrating a game where they have 1 billion users or so. And I hope we'll get there sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.
Hi. One of the things which I have concerned about VR and AR is the fact that we might be approaching the problem that we had with Windows, which replaced DOS. Those of us who walk the ages, ancient dinosaurs, and remember green screens and other things, is that when we talk about accessibility, a lot of people feared losing their jobs, and we let a lot of people out at first. DOS had screen readers and things that way. How are we going to approach these systems? And I thought it was interesting you brought up touch, because so many people who have accessibility issues and physical accessibility, touch is still usually there to some form. How are we going to approach that to bring them into these worlds? We're finally starting to get some headway in console and PC gaming for people who have physical challenges, but right now when I see all this, I really get worried that we're locking out people again and really doing it, and maybe it's a tradition of the cell phone itself, which a lot of people felt locked out people.
Yeah, I think that you know, with VR there is so much experimentation that still needs to go on, and we need to get multiple niches that we explore. With one of the games that we did that I didn't mention was a solitaire game where we ended up only using gaze. And we had a journalist coming up to us who was super happy because his father had become paralyzed, and he used to love solitaire. And with our game, he could now play the whole game just by looking at the card and just using his vision. So I think that there is a lot of exciting ways to go in, and you know, obviously if you use your 2 hands for touching things, that might not be the correct way for all games. But it definitely becomes very, very intuitive for people, because you already know, for instance, how to use a computer or interact with a smartphone. There's a job simulator is often brought up as a really great VR game where they've distilled a lot of this great touch interaction into something that you use just your previous knowledge of the world to interact with things.
Yeah, I mean, you explained really good about VR, but you haven't spent time on AR. What do you think the future and everything will go with AR?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in AR. Right now, Resolution is focusing on virtual reality. I think virtual reality is already here. There is hardware that supports that. There is a few examples of hardware that supports AR as well, but I think it's further away. I think AR will replace smartphones in a not so distant future, but still a lot of things need to happen on weight and performance and calculation speed, etc. Some of the things are applicable on both fields, like if you make 3D characters and you know, you work with voice animation and things like that. That's relevant for both fields, and a lot of the experience you get from building experience for VR can be brought over to AR. Other things are completely different, but I'm very bullish about AR but I still think it's some years away, even so with virtual reality, of course.
So last question. Your title of your talk was that VR shouldn't mimic mobile, and one of your slides said there was great fragmentation early on, and you put a plethora of devices up there. In the VR space, we have Daydream and Oculus, HTC Vive, and PlayStation VR, and then they sort of go on from there. Which platforms do you support, and which ones? Why did you choose those platforms, and how do you see that coalescing in the future?
So we're a small studio, and I think one of the important thing always is focus. To not try to smear yourself too broadly on different things. So we've focused on mobile VR at this point, partially because of our background, partially because it's so much simpler to just take a mobile phone. You can bring it with you, show it for other people. The barriers are much lower than installing the PC kit at home and constantly updating new drivers to different things to make it work. But on the tethered PC side, you also have touch controllers, which I think is a very crucial thing of a great VR experience. So it's a trade-off. You have to look at what's right for you. But for us, it's been great to focus on mobile VR at this point and make sure that there's some good content there.
So looking into your crystal ball, sometime in the future, will we have a device, we'll take our mobile device and plug it into a viewer, or will there be a new hardware device like a phone or a watch or a tablet? Is there space in the industry for a new device that's dedicated for VR?
I'm sure that in if we look maybe 8 years ahead, we will have glasses that will be capable of both VR and AR. But it's going to be 8 or maybe even more years ahead, and then we don't need to carry around this pretty big phone that we're carrying around now. So there's a lot of smart people working on that. I'm not on the hardware side myself, but I'm confident that other people will solve it for me.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for a round of applause. Thank you.